Barbara. Shep Phillips' daughter-in-law handed out one of these kits to each family member to trace their ancestors. In her own family, everyone spit into the test tube and was delighted with the results. It turned out they were 100 Swedish Norwegian, not a drop of other blood. But Barbara knew that her husband's family had been mongrelized and thought it would be interesting to see how much they mixed. That would be fun. She had no idea. Pigs could have so many different meanings. You never know how it's going to end up. But Barbara is one of those women who can light up a room just by walking into it. So the entire Phillips family had done the spit in a test tube test and were going to release the results right after Easter dinner. Schultz's mom, Haley, did everything right. The dinner table was bursting with a variety of vegetables and other side dishes to a sumptuous lamb roast with Spanish-style rice. A family favorite. Both siblings, older brother Hal and younger sister Marty, were there with their spouses. Jeb invited his current girlfriend, but she declined so she could spend the day at her grandparents' house. Their relationship was in its infancy, so they were lucky they didn't have to eat twice on Easter. Jeb's father, Ed Harold, did the honors by slicing up the lamb and handing out a piece to everyone at the family table. Even Marty took a piece, apparently after her 2-year experiment with vegetarianism. As their plates filled, Hale said grace and Harold made a toast. To the love and kindness this family had shown each other. If anyone noticed the tears rolling from Haley's eyes, no one mentioned it. Haley had a habit of crying when she was happy, when she was watching old movies, or on those rare occasions when she was sad. But the family was used to Haley's tears. When everyone finished eating, Hale and Jeb cleared the table. It was customary in the Phillips house. The mom cooked with Marty's halip, and the boys cleared the table and filled the dishwasher. Jeb and Hale returned to the table and found everyone sitting with unopened envelopes in front of their seats. The plan was to read the results and then tackle banana cream pie for dessert. While the envelopes were being opened, Haley got up from the table and apologized. Everyone assumed she had gone to the bathroom and continued reading the test results. Harold read his first, 95 British Irish, 5 Dutch. As soon as Hale opened the envelope, Barbara snatched it from his hands, too excited to wait. I knew it. I knew you had an interesting mix. 46 British Irish, 28 French German, and 26 Iberian. That's Spanish and Portuguese, right? Barbara handed the printout back to her husband and leaned to the left to look at Marty's printout. It's almost the same, only Marty has more French German and less Iberian. What do you say? Jeb stared at the printout. The expression on his face testified to the confusion raging in his head. He took his eyes off the page to focus on Barbara's smiling face, then on his brother and sister sitting on either side of Barbara. Finally, he turned to the head of the table. His father stared back at him. He couldn't read the expression in his father's eyes. The silence was interrupted by Hale. Did I just hear the garage door open? Where's Mom? Hale got up from the table and looked out the front window. As do you, Dad. Mom's pulling out of the driveway. What the hell is going on? Brittany pulled out her cell phone and dialed her mother's number. Now everyone was looking at Marty as she waited for Haley to answer the phone. The room was quiet enough to hear Haley's voice when she picked up the phone. "I'm sorry, baby. Tell everyone I'm sorry." And then the line went dead. "Dad, what's going on?" Harold looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Jeb, why don't you read what the service sent you?" Ub hesitated. Did his father really want this to go public? "Go on, son. It says here that I'm 50 Italian, 22 Iberian, and 28 French German." Suddenly, Eb remembered all the ridicule he and Ted Rizzo had gotten in school because they were alike. He looked at his father. "Dad, did you know?" Like the rest of the family sat in stunned silence, watching and waiting for Harold's answer. "I began to suspect it when I saw you and Ted Rizzo standing next to each other on your high school baseball team. It was around the same time that Ted's mother and father split up. No one knew why they broke up, but it didn't take a genius to assume that Ted's mother saw the same thing I did." Harold turned to the others. "I don't mean to be rude, but I think Jet and I need to discuss this privately. Outside on the porch. Oh, Marty, I think you should give your mother some time before you call her. And when you do, please be kind. This is not the time to pry answers out of her. I have my own questions that I think should be answered first. Please respect your mother's privacy and my privacy. Ed, grab your drink and let's go outside." Eb and Harold went out on the porch and sat down. Jeb didn't wait to ask his first question. "So is Mr. Rizzo my father?" "Well, I'm your father. Please don't insult the 22 years I spent raising you by denying me that title." "I'm sorry. Bad. That didn't sound right." "So did you. I meant to say that just because I didn't contribute to your DNA doesn't mean you're not my son or that I don't love you as much as I always have. But to answer your question, maybe Rizzo is your biological father." "I don't know. We'll have to ask your mom when she's ready." "Where do you think she went?" Harold actually laughed. "Where else would she go? I suspect that right now she's sitting on your Aunt April's couch, crying her eyes out in her sister's arms." "Dad, you said you started suspecting over 12 years ago. Why didn't you ever confront Mom and ask her about it?" "A bunch of reasons. First of all, I didn't want anything to come between us. By the time I began to suspect it, I was hopelessly in love with you as my son. I was always proud of you and of being your father. I didn't want anything to change." The Harold sipped from his whiskey glass and continued. "I hope you didn't start thinking the worst of me as a man. But the second reason is that I love your mother so much that I didn't want that to change either. As far as I could tell, your mother was in love with me. She showed me that love every day we were married. When I reflect on it, her love only intensified after you were born. If she did have an affair with Ted's father, she spent the last 20+ years trying to make it up to me. I was happy to let her do that. But if you liked the status quo, why did you go along with Barbara's suggestion of DNA testing?" "Towel. Abby, you know your brother's wife. Do you think she'll ever let it go? That girl is so innocent. It never occurred to her that our family might have a skeleton in the closet. Your brother is a lucky man. Father and son laughed as Harold filled Jeb's glass 2 fingers full again. Besides, it's time to follow through. Your mother and I had a secret all these years, and I wanted to know who, what, and why. I probably could have done that in a more appropriate setting, but I guess I fell into the dumbass category. Is that, and I thought your mom would turn to me with some answers before things got this far. I really didn't expect her to snap like that. Now the 2 of them sat and let the silence of Haley's backyard fill their senses without saying a word. The Haley's spring flowers, white lilies, blue irises, and colorful pansies adorned the brick-lined patio. It was truly a peaceful, beautiful place. 10 minutes passed in silence before Hale poked his head out the back door. Else Ted appearing, Abby, Jeb, we're all going to leave if you don't want us here. Marty tried to call her mom again, but it went to voicemail. Just if you know Marty and Barbara, neither of those 2 could part with it that easily. Marty was standing right behind Hale's back when he said this and expressed her displeasure by punching her older brother in the arm. Marty hugged her father and then her brother Jeb, practically robbing him of his breath. There were tears in her eyes. Marty's husband shook everyone's hands and led Marty away. Barbara was next, repeating the sequence of actions. She hugged Harold and pulled Jeb to her, kissing his cheek before Hale led her out the side gate. Harold escorted them out with a look and pointed Jeb to a patio chair. Let's finish our drinks. I'd like you to do me a favor. Could you ask Ted if he knows how to contact his father? Eb looked at his father. Why? Patricia, you're not going to do something stupid, are you? No, it's not like it hasn't crossed my mind once or twice. Sometimes I fantasize about hurting him, but right now I just need to talk to him before I talk to your mother. That's the problem with infidelity. But it takes away your trust in your spouse's words and actions. Keep this in mind if and when you get married. You'll have plenty of opportunities to lose your way, and you may think you can handle it without hurting your marriage, but it always takes at least a little time away from the relationship, no matter how inconsequential the betrayal may seem at the time. Okay, a tad about my truths, as long as you promise. I'll call Ted tomorrow. Last I heard, Mr. Rizzo was selling cars up north in Dallas. What are you gonna tell Ted? Let's wait until our family situation clears up. Then Ted and I can talk about our relationship. I think Ted's always wondered that himself, if he doesn't already know. Thank you. I'd like to surprise Tony Rizzo if I can. Now that the lid was off the kettle, no one wanted to waste any time. Ep called Ted on Monday morning, and after the usual relationship clarification, found out where Ted's father worked without revealing why. Just 2 friends going through shit. How's your mom? How's your dad doing? What are they up to? At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, Harold Phillips knocked on the door of Tony Rizzo's sales office at the Lexus dealership where Tony worked. Just when Tony tore his gaze away from the papers on his desk, old feelings surged inside Harold. For urge to punch that asshole right in the nose. Harold. It had been over a dozen years, and Tony still couldn't think of a reason why his old neighbor was standing in his office doorway. It took Harold a moment to collect his thoughts. Hello, Tony. I was wondering if you had a minute to talk. This is a private conversation, so maybe we could go somewhere less crowded. Tony's thoughts began to clear. Sure, let's get the car and go for a drive. Tony grabbed a bunch of car keys and held the door open for Harold. They drove to the nearest park and got out without saying a word. Both men sat down on a bench facing a small pond. I want to know about you and Haley. Tony was still trying to catch up. Harold's words were not what he expected. There was a look of surprise on his face. What do you mean, me and Haley? There was never anything between me and your wife. Tony's attempted evasion pissed Harold off. What the hell do you mean, nothing? Don't mess with me. Tony, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Jeb and Ted are brothers, and Jeb's DNA just showed it. He's half Italian. Rizzo. Although Tony found the situation funny, he was smart enough to realize that Harold wouldn't find it funny. After all, Tony had a dozen years to get used to the idea. Harold would only now find out the truth. Tony suppressed a laugh. God. Harold, didn't you and Haley have a conversation? You weren't looking for me. At first, I thought it was you sleeping with my ex, Sophia. When I saw Jeb and Ted playing together on the baseball field, I thought they must both be your sons because I never touched your wife. In fact, I was ready to come down and kick your ass. Luckily, I picked a fight with Sophia first. Told her I was gonna make you pay. That's when Sophia told me the truth. Paul Mazzetti is Ted's father. Mazzetti, that son of a bitch who lived on the corner before he moved west. Harold was stunned. You're telling me that Mazzetti screwed Sophia and Haley. Sophia didn't say whether she knew anything about Haley. I think she suspected, though. Sophia said that Mazzetti was probably Ted's father because they were having an affair when she got pregnant. Why didn't you tell me? Because you and Haley seemed happy. I thought you two had a good marriage. Hell, I thought if I had Ted and Jeb figured out, you probably did too. And who am I to make a fuss if you don't say anything? Harold had to think about it, but it did make sense. Harold, I'm sorry if you think I should have said something. After I found out, I knew that Sophia and I were getting a divorce. I couldn't accept her betrayal, but I didn't want to be the cause of your divorce. Plus, let me confess to a more selfish reason. If you had been around, you could have kept a close eye on Ted, and you did. Half the reason he turned out to be a fine young man is because of your influence on him. I know that, and I'll always be grateful for it. It's true. After Rizzo's divorce, and until Sophia left 3 years ago, the boys grew close, and Harold was almost a second father to Ted. Tony stared at Harold for a minute, watching him try to digest this information. It makes you dizzy, doesn't it? Dizzy? I'm ready to puke. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about beating the shit out of you, and here you are, a victim like me. I'm glad you're not one of those hotheads who barges into my office with guns drawn. Well, now I gotta find Mazzetti and talk to him. Any idea where he went? Mazzetti is dead. Dead? How? Boating accident. He had too much to drink, took his boat out on Lake Mead, and fell overboard, drowned. The smile on Tony's face as he recounted Mazzetti's fate sent a chill down Harold's spine. But the smile lasted only a split second on his face before it was replaced by an expression of deep concern. A shame, really. We could probably both sue the bastard for child support or something. But in the long run, it's probably better this way. I don't think either of the boys would want to hang out with an asshole who goes around seducing married women. Just with those words, both men got up from the park bench and headed for the car. As they drove back to the car dealership, Tony asked what had led to this after all these years. Harold explained how DNA tests had precipitated it all, including Haley's trip to see her sister. It's none of my business, but what are you going to do about Haley now? I guess now that Mazzetti's gone, I'll have to get answers from Haley. I was hoping to hear both sides of the story, but overall, I'm not saddened by the news that the asshole drowned. Does Ted know? No, Ted still believes I'm his father. I try to keep in touch with him, show him I care about him, despite the divorce from his mom. Some days are better than others. One of us calls the other at least once every 2 weeks. Harold nodded. Jeb, knowing he's half Italian, is likely to complicate things. He thinks he's Ted's half-brother and you're his biological father. When I tell him the truth, he's bound to want more answers, and eventually it will get to Ted. You and Sophia might want to prepare yourselves. Tony was suddenly overcome with sadness. He loved Ted and didn't want that to change. Can you ask Jeb to wait a week? Give me a chance to talk to Ted? You know I will, and I know Jeb will. Good luck. Tony, and thanks. By the time Harold got in his car and drove home, he was physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted. There was a sign for a chain hotel in front of one of the exits as he headed south. Harold decided to stop and rent a room for a few hours or overnight. He would decide later. With room key in hand, Harold changed his mind about taking a nap. The gentlemen's club across the street seemed to be calling his name. He hadn't been to a strip club since his bachelor party almost 30 years ago. In fact, in all those years, Harold had only seen one naked woman other than his wife. It was time to rectify that. When Harold walked into the club, he almost came back out. What the hell am I doing here? But he paid the entrance fee and sat down at the far end of the room. A waitress in a revealing suit took his drink order, and he watched a surprisingly attractive woman on stage dancing in only the smallest of thongs. Harold was a little disappointed. The club wasn't completely nude. An Asian girl approached him and asked if he wanted a lap dance. Turcor, Harold was tempted but refused when he was told he would be kicked out of the club if he touched her during the private dance. Damn, how can some guy sit there while some chick with nice breasts against your chest? Several more girls danced and undressed on stage while Harold sipped his drink. All the girls did a decent job showing enthusiasm. Harold tipped each girl $5. Harold ordered a second bourbon while watching an Asian woman dance on stage. He couldn't believe a woman could bend in half like that. He walked up on stage and slipped a $10 bill into her thong. Harold couldn't take his eyes off her, and she noticed. Using her dance, she approached Harold a second time. We can go to the back to a private room. We can be alone there. As Harold looked at those perfect breasts, the curve of her waist, and the perfect belly. He looked into those eyes. Why would such a beautiful creature make a living stripping and offering sex to strangers? Harold would never know, because instead of following the girl into the back room, he stood up, handed her another $10 bill, muttered a thank you, and walked out the door. There was a liquor store next door. Harold bought a bottle of bourbon and went to his room. The next morning, Harold woke up with a splitting headache. He glanced at the clock. Damn it, it was 10:30. There was a horrible taste in his mouth. No wonder, since the last time he had brushed his teeth was yesterday morning. Harold put on pants and a t-shirt and headed for the office. He grabbed a pack of aspirin, toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, and a cup of coffee before returning to his room. The shower helped, and after an hour he felt more human. He dialed Haley's number and was glad when she picked up. We need to talk. I'm at work right now. When do you want to meet? I can be home in an hour. Can you take the rest of the day off? Why do you ask? Where are you? Harold's headache was coming back and it was making him miserable. It doesn't matter where I am. Just tell me if you can come home soon. Harold heard Haley start to cry. I'll be there. I love. Harold hung up the phone. As Harold drove north on the freeway, he wondered why he was so angry after all these years. He had known for years that Jeb was not his biological son. He'd always suspected that Rizzo was the father. As part of his anger, the new knowledge that Haley had slept with that fatso Mazzetti. And it was Mazzetti who had conceived Jeb. Damn, he'd always hated that asshole. Harold realized that no matter how deep you drive the feeling of being Hornswoggled, those feelings always remain. I should have gone to bed early last night. He said it out loud in the car, but he knew better. He had grown up and was no longer the kind of man who broke promises. After breaking his vows years ago, he promised himself to never make the same mistake again. Haley was already home when Harold pulled into the driveway. He entered the house to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Haley was sitting at the same dining room table, in the same spot where Harold had last seen her 3 days ago. So much had happened since Easter, he thought to himself as he watched Haley open a box of pastries from his favorite bakery. "It's a payoffs," Harold said with a smile in his voice. He loved this woman. "Who said it was for you?" Haley replied, taking a bite from a sweet roll with cream cheese. Haley's humor was one of the traits Harold loved about her, and she knew it. He appreciated her attempt to brighten the moment, but it was time to get serious. "Tell me about Paul Mazzetti." Haley even flinched when Harold said the name. She was suddenly small and frightened. Could this be the end of her marriage? How did Harold know it was Paul? Children, all these thoughts whirled through her mind, but with nothing else to help her gather her thoughts. Haley stood up and poured coffee into the 2 cups in front of her. She handed 1 coffee cup and a box of brownies to Harold. Harold sat and waited without taking a sip of coffee or a bite from the cinnamon bun. Haley finally started talking. "It happened twice. I'm sorry. I'd give anything to make it right. Then I got pregnant with Jeb. I swear I thought Jeb was yours. Everyone said how much he looked like me and my brothers. That was until he started growing up, and I saw Jeb and Ted together when they were in 5th grade. I still remember that horrible moment. It was during a field trip when Sophia and I were chaperones. I looked at Sophia as the 2 boys waited for the bus together. I could see it in Sophia's eyes, even though she didn't even say a word. We both knew. We had never talked about it, even after Tony dumped Sophia and filed for divorce, even after Sophia put the house on the market and left town. Harold was tired of rambling. He wanted answers. "Tell me how it started." Haley looked Harold straight in the eye. "When I tell you, I want you to understand something. I'm not excusing my behavior or blaming anyone but myself. I also want you to know that Jeb has been your son in everything but DNA since he started growing in my belly. He is our son, yours and mine. I told Jeb the same thing Sunday night. I'm glad. He loves you and needs you. It started with Paul 6 months after Hale was born. I was still struggling with the extra pounds from pregnancy and felt fat and ugly." As Harold interrupted Haley, "Don't give me that I felt fat and ugly crap. When have I ever said you weren't beautiful?" Given Harold's angry outburst, Haley's response was calm, much calmer than she felt. "You didn't have to say it. All you had to do was have an affair with that woman from work the year you 2 kept your affair going before and after Hale was born." At situations, if Haley had pulled out a shotgun and shot Harold in the chest, the effect of her words couldn't have been more serious. He sat there with his mouth open and just stared, not saying a word. "What? Did you think I didn't know? Did you think you were so sneaky that I didn't smell the odor of sex and her perfume from you when you came in late after working all evening on important projects?" Harold still didn't say a word, so Haley continued. "I wasn't going to cheat or settle scores. All I wanted was for you to realize that you still loved me and wanted me to be your wife, not that woman. What kind of woman would try to steal a man away from his wife who had just given birth to his little son?" Paul took advantage of the situation. He was walking by the house one night. I had just gotten home and Hal was in the back seat. I had groceries in the back seat of the car, and Hale was yelling at the top of his voice because he was dirty. Paul pulled over, and while I was changing Hale's clothes, Paul brought the groceries. You were working late again. I invited Paul to sit and have a beer while I laid out the groceries. Paul was charming, and I told him more than I should have. Paul was to Paul's credit and my downfall. He was a master seducer with his charm and pleasant looks. I was a lonely, frustrated young mom with low self-esteem. Thus, over the next few weeks, Paul seemed to be available anytime I needed something done. "Call me anytime," he said. So I did. When the garage door jammed and you were at work, Paul fixed it. When there was a foul odor coming from the furnace, Paul found a dead mouse trapped inside. And every time he came over, he told me how beautiful I was. He even gave me a bunch of flowers. They sat right there on the dining room table. There on the dining room table for 4 days, and you didn't even notice them. Then one day he kissed me, and before I knew it, I was naked and lying on my back. Just want to know, for example, was he better than you or more than you? Harold just shook his head. No, he was still trying to come to grips with the fact that Haley knew about their affair, an affair with a coworker that had lasted 8 months before he ended it. He remembered why it had ended when he felt Haley slipping away from him and realized how much he loved her. He remembered the fear when Janice Muller threatened to call Haley and tell her all about their affair. He dodged a bullet. Since the affair had gone on for almost a year and his wife hadn't found out a thing. It was a secret Harold had kept for the past 20+ years. Haley wasn't finished, and her words interrupted his thoughts. Okay, but I'll tell you, he was neither. Not better, not more, but he was there for me when I needed a friend. Was only he wasn't a real friend, just another asshole with an ego who wanted to distinguish himself. A couple days after that first time, he came back and we did it again. After that second time, 2 things happened. Then first, I was so badly conscience-stricken that I cried nonstop for 2 days. Second, the next day you came home right after work and kissed me like you hadn't kissed me in almost a year. When I told you I hadn't made dinner, you took Hale and me to Sullivan's for a delicious dinner. We made love that night and every night for the next week. I was in 7th heaven. You were my husband again. I thought that was the week Jeb was conceived because it was my fertility week. It never occurred to me that Paul was the father until the day of the tour. Was he the only one? Haley was furious and her voice rose when she answered. Yes, was Janice Muller the only one? Heck, she even knew and remembered her name. Yes, she was, and I'm sorry. Yes, it was stupid of me, and it's the one thing I'm most ashamed of in my entire life. Well, I guess that makes 2 of us. What do we do now? I know you've always hated Paul, and now you know he and I had an affair, however brief, and that he's Jeb's biological father. Can you even look at me after that? I still love you. Haley, I still want to be your husband and your friend and your lover. I want us to grow old together. I'm not naive. There may be some consequences after this, maybe a few fights, but I want you to come home tonight. Haley got up from her chair and sat on Harold's lap. She put her arms around his neck and kissed him. Take me to bed, and he did. Epilogue: after they made love, they got up and ordered Thai food for dinner. Harold and Haley sat on the back porch eating spring rolls, green curry, and pad thai. They drank a nice Pinot Gris and talked. Harold, please tell me you're not going to do something stupid and go after PayPal right now. Haley, do me a favor and stop calling him Paul. Call him Mazzetti or asshole, but not Paul. And to answer your question, no, I'm not going after him. I can't because Mazzetti's dead. Dead? How do you know that? Because Tony Rizzo told me that Mazzetti died in a boating accident. Tony told you. You don't think so? I don't know, and I don't care. But not everybody whose name ends in a vowel gets in the mob, so just talk about it. You need to work on your soprano accent if you're gonna do that. You're not very good at it. Still the same crazy humor that made Harold laugh. They were supposed to be doing well. I'm gonna stop speaking with a New Jersey accent. My God, that would be great. A little over a week later, on a Saturday afternoon, Eb and Ted knocked on the front door. Harold was happy to see the two boys and even happier to see them both smiling. I can't believe that Bum is my brother. Ted said this while laughing. Ed and I were talking on Thursday, and he told me all about it. It made me wonder how much I owe you. Like Mr. Phillips, you've been there for me since my parents split up. I know I wouldn't have gone into engineering if you hadn't encouraged me. All I can say is thank you. Harold gave Ted a hug. You're welcome. And you know you're always welcome in our home. The world is a crazy place, almost as crazy as this house. Are you and Daddy gonna be okay? We'll be fine. He's a funny guy. He was more worried about my mom and you. Said I should never think badly of my mom. That everyone screws up, and she will always love me and be my mom. Said you are someone I should look up to. The way you and Mrs. Phillips endured it and worked to keep your marriage together. How you showed rare courage through it all. I know what he's talking about. Thank you again. Harold smiled. I told Jeb the other day, and I'll tell you, when you get married, don't let a sweet-ass woman get in your head. Haley and I are the rare exception. Few couples survive infidelity. Now let's go to the garden. Haley's back, and she'd love for you two to visit her. I'll get us all a beer. Harold was taking 4 cans of beer out of the fridge when he saw this. There's a fresh banana cream pie on the second shelf. He never got a slice of pie on Easter Sunday. Harold smiled